Hi, welcome to this special program on BevCam. I'm your host, Walt Kosmowski. This program is being produced by the North Beverly Neighborhood Association, and we will be talking about the Brimbal Avenue Interchange Project. And with me are two members of the North Beverly Neighborhood Association, DeAngelis and Dr. Jen Morris. Welcome. Welcome to BevCam. Welcome to the show. And I'll address the first question to you, Dan. And for those of our viewers who maybe aren't familiar with your organization, tell us a little bit about the North Beverly Neighborhood Association, how you got started, what your mission is, how long you've been around.
Sure. So the North Beverly Neighborhood Association has been in place for probably 5 or 6 months now. In the middle of this past summer, we began getting involved when we learned about the new proposal that was put forth by the mayor as part of the MassWorks grant and involving the land swap on Brimbal Ave. Prior to that, we'd been involved as the Brimbal Ave Neighborhood Association, and that was in existence back in 2009 when the developer first made proposals on the landfill, and that included the IR overlay that would have allowed retail development at that site. So it was roughly midsummer or so when we began, and it was probably in September when we began to grow in numbers because of the concern after hearing at the public hearings what was going to be involved. Our numbers grew exponentially when folks learned of the scope of the project and the impact it would have on the neighborhoods. And from that point on, we've had over 100 contributors to our organization, to our fundraising in efforts to get the word out and to let folks know how concerned we are about the impact it'll have. Mm-hmm.
And Jen, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. I'd just add that we are in a large part modeled after our neighbors in Montserrat, the Montserrat Neighborhood Group, and they've been very supportive of our efforts. And I would just say that while being involved in this neighborhood association has been a lot of work, it's also been a very rewarding experience in terms of really getting to know some neighbors and making new friends. So that's been the reward of this process.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jen, let me ask you then, so far as the process has unfolded, what has been your area of greatest concern about how things have progressed so far and how they progressed in the past regarding this project? Yeah,
so one of the biggest concerns for us, and I think citizens throughout the city, has been the lack of a public process. The residents who will be most directly impacted, local businesses, and just citizens throughout the city were never engaged in the planning process of this project. Meetings and hearings were held, but after all the decisions were made, just to inform us of what was going on. So a lot of us were caught off guard when all this this news of this giant project being planned, down the street from us came out. And so the other big problem has just been the lack of information flow from the city. Information has been extremely hard to come by. There's been misinformation, constantly changing information. We've had to exercise great efforts on our end to really obtain, documents, information. We've been in constant contact with city leaders, with leaders at the state level, Mass DOT, the MassWorks grant program, to try to get the information and answers to the questions that the city was not providing. So I think actually a lot of information that went out to the citizens of Beverly was because of our efforts, because City Hall wasn't willingly offering that information.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Dan, anything to add to that?
Yes, I'd just like to add, it was that lack of information and inability to get the information that I think was something that we felt from citizens when we began going out into the neighborhoods in order to get signatures to get this referendum question put on the ballot. And in order to do that, we stood in front of grocery stores for several weeks. We went door to door asking folks to sign the Brimbal Ave petition. What struck most of us, I think, was the fact that many people that we spoke to felt that it was a done deal, that the project was already in the works, it was going to happen, there was no reversing it. And I think it was the lack of information, the fact that folks weren't able to get adequate information about just how involved the project was, that gave folks the sense that there was no point fighting City Hall. It was inevitable. And it was we felt that it was our role to let folks know that they had a voice, and that's why we've pushed this. That's why we've gotten to this point, because we wanted every citizen in the city to have a chance to vote on this, because it's that important. It's not just our neighborhood that we're concerned about. It's the impact it's going to have on the whole city.
Mm-hmm. Now, we all know that there is a phase 1 and a phase 2 to this project. And so I'd like to ask you what specifically, and either of you can take this question, what specifically are your concerns about phase 1?
Sure. Well, if it would be possible just to pull up one of the graphics before we started, I just wanted to show you
which figure do you
figure
want?
number 2, if you wouldn't mind. We can go back to number 1 in just a moment. But just to give some brief perspective, figure 2 is a map of the interchange project as it was proposed back in 2004. There, thank you very much for that. This was the original proposal back in 2004. And what I'd just like to point out is that this was a plan that at the time didn't involve any of the things that we're talking about on the new Brimbal Ave project. You'll notice, for example, that the intersection is exactly where it is currently, the connector road. And the new proposal that DOT has proposed essentially leaves the connector road right where it is. But you can see in this plan that there's no phase 1 or phase 2 here. It's simply the Brimbal Ave intersection. It was a genuine effort on the part of the state and DOT engineers to get traffic off of Brimbal Ave. The goal here is clearly to get traffic off of Brimbal Ave from the music theater and now from the property that Cumming Center owns. So there wasn't the emphasis on the development on Brimbal Ave, but rather emphasis on the effort to reduce traffic on Brimbal Ave. And so it's a project that's been around for a long time. This original project was clearly much less involved than the project that we're seeing now. If you could go to the first slide, and we've separated, this is something that we've been putting out in our literature. It shows the various portions of the buildup of phase 1 and phase 2. And I just wanted to draw your attention to the specifics of it that we were concerned about. Taken as a whole, the impact that this would have on Brimbal Ave is pretty significant. The widening of Brimbal Ave, as it's pointed out, the connector road being moved and allowing for a larger shopping center as a result. So specific to phase 1, our concern has been, I think, the impact that the development that it allows to be built was our greatest concern, the impact it would have on traffic. It seemed odd to be suggesting that we're doing something to improve traffic flow in this area, and then we're allowing a grocery store to be built on the area that's only going to make the traffic worse. Mm-hmm. Traffic engineers had studied this. They'd presented it to the city council during one of the planning board meetings, and the number that they had put on that for the impact on traffic was 300 cars per afternoon peak hour. When we had a chance to speak with the engineer from Rod Emery, from Jacobs Engineering, in fact, that 300 number that he was putting out there was less than the actual number would be, because the number that he had used was based not on a retail grocery store, but just rather general retail. So in fact, that 300 cars per hour would be higher. So that was our greatest concern, I think, the impact that this particular project might have on the neighborhood. And this is a neighborhood, after all. This is a fairly small industrial parcel on Brimbal Ave, and it is surrounded by houses on either side. It's heavily residential. Not only are there residences there, but in addition there are 2 schools, one on either end of the street. It's the main access road to Beverly Hospital. And most importantly, it's got train stations on either end of it. And for folks that have traveled Brimbal Ave, when there's a backup on the highway, that traffic finds its way to Brimbal Ave and results in gridlock on either end of it. Mm-hmm. So I would say the traffic was the main driving force for our concern over the impact it was going to have. Mm-hmm.
And Jen, anything to add on what you see as the impact of phase 1 in the neighborhood and on the city as a whole?
Yeah, the biggest concern for me was just how out of scale everything was for this residential area. Like Dan said, there's just this kind of small industrial zoned area in the middle of really vibrant neighborhoods, the Montserrat and North Beverly. And so this project just seems completely out of scale. Both the extent of the roadway improvements as well as the plaza proposal and bringing in this giant, regional attracting, grocery store. And so that was a big concern for us, how that would play out in terms of the traffic. And we're not naive. We don't expect that there will never be development there. We just would like resident input to come up with a plan that will develop a project that's more in scale with the neighborhood, not something that's going to make traffic an even bigger nightmare on the road than it already is.
Yes, Dan.
If I could just add, and this was a point that was raised by City Council President Paul Guanci, the concern that the impact that all of this development would have on Brimbal Ave, I think, is significant. North Beverly is already home to 3 grocery stores. It is essentially where Beverly shops for groceries if they don't go out of town. Putting an additional grocery store in North Beverly will turn North Beverly into an island. It will make it impassable. It will turn Brimbal Ave very much into what 1A currently is and what Route 62 Elliott Street is. There's too much traffic there to begin with. To bring in a project that's only going to make that problem worse simply doesn't make sense. And as Jen said, we're not averse to some development there. We recognize something needs to be done. Previous proposals that the developer has presented for this project involved a mixed use, and that's something that I think we could all agree upon as a more toned down and more scaled and appropriate to the neighborhood development.
And certainly the crux of this phase 1 is this proposed land swap, which you folks are against. So describe your opposition to the proposed land swap. Either of you can start with that.
Sure, I'd be happy to start. First of all, I would say the greatest concern with the land swap is the fact that it does allow a larger development. The developer's owned this property now since 2005. He's had every opportunity to develop it at any point along the way that he wanted to. This new proposal has given him an opportunity to build something larger and therefore, in our minds, out of scope for what the neighborhood really calls for. So our opposition specifically to this would be the impact that the land swap would have in creating a development larger than it needs to be. And the fact that this has been tied to this MassWorks grant, there was a perception somehow that the money goes away. And even in the last couple of days, literature from the folks that are in support of this project are still insisting that that money goes away if this project in its current configuration doesn't happen. So if the land swap doesn't happen, the money goes away. That is simply not true. The mayor made that clear on this very channel when he spoke to it. My conversations with the woman that handles the MassWorks grant were the same. They will give us the money. They're anxious to do something with Brimbal Ave to make things better. And that $5 million won't go away if we can provide to them a plan that does essentially what the land swap proposal does, which is improve the traffic flow around the area. And so it was gratifying to us to see the DOT came up with a plan that they see as their preferred option, because that plan allows for improved traffic flow. There will still be rotaries likely, but it will put the road on its current footprint. So for us, it leaves the developer owning land that he owns. It's a landfill. He bought it knowing it's a landfill, and he can do whatever he chooses with it. But it will solely be his responsibility for cleanup and maintaining ownership. The state has indicated they can build a road on the existing connector road. There aren't any issues with settling. There are no other concerns for the roadway. They can put the road there. So we don't feel that there's any sense of the city getting involved in it if they don't need to.
And I think we have a figure. Do you want to have the audience look at, our viewers look at that? Which figure is that shows the
Sure, I'm
state's,
sorry. If you would, slide number 5. This is it is only a concept at this point. I think DOT said it's only at a 5% level. But this is very similar to the first slide we showed from 2004 because it basically shows the new configuration on the existing connector road. So this does not involve the state or the city getting involved in any way in the landfill. The landfill remains the complete ownership of the developer. Again, he can develop there at any time that he wants to. But this project does essentially what the Phase 1 project did. And in my conversations with the engineer involved, he indicated that this was their preferred plan because it met all of their requirements. When they came up with their own traffic studies, even they agreed that it made all of these turns above the required scale for a traffic turn. So, for example, all those Fs that we were talking about, those left turns on Brimbal Ave, they suddenly become As for the most part, with only one exception. So this does what's needed to be done in terms of traffic remediation. It still allows development on Brimbal Ave. It does not mean that we can't develop Brimbal Ave, that we're going to miss any revenue as a result of that. And because of the way it's designed, it allows for the proposals on Sawyer Road and Tozer Road to go through because it doesn't impact negatively traffic in those areas as well. So there's a reason DOT referred to this as their preferred plan. they don't want to get involved in a connector road that's going to be built on a landfill, whether it costs $5 million or $500,000. If 5 or 10 years from now that road decides to sink because the engineering wasn't as up to par as it needed to be, the state wouldn't want to be responsible for that. This gives them an opportunity to not get involved in that land swap in any way and still meet the traffic requirements that they feel important to be addressed.
Now let's fast forward a little bit to Phase 2, which so far there is definitely a Phase 2 involved. It's not as well defined as Phase 1. Now, what are your thoughts, or the North Beverly Neighborhood Association's thoughts on the number of jobs and tax revenues that this phase will create, which some of the proponents of it are saying is really key to this whole development?
Sure.
Either one want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, first I would point out that there's been an awful lot of conflating of Phase 1 and Phase 2, and a lot of arguments have been made that we have to do this specific Phase 1 plan in order to be able to do Phase 2. And we've discussed this with the engineer just at the most recent Brimbal Ave Advisory Committee meeting, and there's literally no reason why we couldn't pursue Phase 2 right now. So Phase 2 does not hinge on this specific Phase 1 plan. So to conflate those arguments, to bring in these job numbers and estimates from Phase 2 and attach them to this Phase 1 and this vote is just not accurate. And so if you're going to talk just about Phase 2, which we could, put in papers and design, tomorrow without having to do Phase 1, then the number estimates still are questionable. We've heard that $8 million number, and to put that in perspective, we have the Cummings Center, which generates about $2.5 million per year in tax revenue. So how we're going to get $8 million back there, that's a lot of Cummings Centers. So I'm not really sure how that would add up, and what that would actually mean for the city of Beverly if we're pushing that level of development back there. So those are other things to think about.
Dan, anything to add on your thoughts on Phase 2?
Sure. So just to reiterate, Phase 1 can be built under either circumstances, and it still allows for the job creation and the revenue from the Phase 1 proposal. And that being used as the kickstart to get the Phase 2 possible. That doesn't go away if we vote no. In fact, that is more likely to happen. The Phase 2 development, those numbers that were generated for jobs were just based on the size of the buildings, the potential that they existed. There are no hard and fast numbers. Beverly Hospital has been thrown out as a possibility. That is still possible, but it's not currently on the books. It's our feeling, though, that the city should be concentrating on those measures, like Phase 2, that can benefit Brimbal Ave and the neighborhoods and revenue for the city, rather than concentrating the way they are in Phase 1. And so the Phase 2 portion of this really is where the city's efforts should be going into to determine whether or not that's an appropriate way to go. And I might add that one of the benefits of the no vote in terms of the actual dollars and cents that are involved. So the proposal as it stands now is a $5 million MassWorks grant. It is already at $5.2 million before a shovel even hits the ground. And the new proposal that DOT has prepared, because of the way the road is reconfigured, it's only a $4 million project. That $1 million savings could go towards some safety enhancements for Brimbal Ave, for example, and it could go towards working towards making Phase 2 work in a better way. One thing I wanted to point out, the difference between the two phases, and a lot has been said, just what will or will not happen. We're still hearing, as I've said, we're still hearing people talk about the road not being built without the land swap. It simply isn't true. Because of the lack of information and the misunderstanding of what the proposal involves, some folks have been suggesting that these traffic enhancements will only make things safer for folks on Brimbal Ave. One spokesman indicated, for example, that there will be crosswalks for children, pedestrian lights for children. It's not true. The current configuration of the Phase 1 proposal requires that if you want to cross Brimbal Ave, you'll have to cross a 4-lane rotary. And in our conversations with the engineer, Rod Emery, he said that the plan is to cross 2 lanes, and then there'll be a buffer zone where you wait until you cross the other 2 lanes of opposing traffic. We asked whether there were any concrete barriers, and there are not. There's only lane striping. So these are very simple things that need to be done in order to make this project safe. And I think it indicates that the project as it's currently proposed really doesn't benefit Brimbal Ave. It doesn't do the things that it claims it's going to do. It doesn't make the road safer, certainly doesn't reduce the traffic in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Now, Dan, you did bring up the concept of the no vote that's happening or the vote
right.
that's happening on February 8th, and that is to remind our viewers to a yes vote will support the City Council's decision to do a land swap and with the developer and the state, and a no vote will mean no land swap. And of course, your association was instrumental in getting this on the ballot because you brought the necessary number of signatures and so forth. So tell the viewers, tell the voters, what does a no vote mean, and why should residents, in your estimation, vote no on February 8th?
Did you want to start on that, or would you like me to?
Sure.
Okay.
First of all, I think it's really important to realize that regardless of the outcome of this vote, necessary road improvements are going to be made. We are going to use the $5 million grant. We're going to get tax revenue from a plaza next door, and we can pursue phase 2. So none of those things depend on the outcome of this vote. How this has evolved is that this referendum now affects where the road improvements will be made. Will they be made on the existing road footprint, or will they be made on CEA's landfill? And so, to claim that the economic future of the city is dependent on moving a road 400 feet is kind of absurd. And we believe that building the road on the landfill is both unwise and unnecessary, and we therefore encourage a no vote. And what the no vote does is it allows us to pursue that new plan on the existing footprint, which we think is really a win-win and a compromise that allows for more scale-appropriate development in the area. So you get a roadway plan that's cheaper, and as Dan said, because it's under the $5 million budget, there's potential to use that extra revenue for added safety, pedestrian and bicycle safety enhancements. We also, as it's important to emphasize that the no vote and building on the existing footprint means that CEA maintains full responsibility and ownership of the landfill. They can still develop there, and because of the size, it will be a smaller development, which is more consistent with the area and the neighborhood, and will draw less traffic to the area. So this is really a win-win. It's the compromise we've been looking for. We expect development, and this kind of is the way to go, in our opinion.
Mm-hmm. Dan, you want to add to that?
Sure. I just wanted to add that I think the important thing to remember is that we're simply trying to preserve a neighborhood. I think any other neighborhood in the city would feel the same way if this came at their doorstep, if it was suddenly presented to them in the way that it was presented to us. We're trying to prevent the sprawl that is already working its way, inching its way up Route 128. Anyone that's traveled on 128 in the afternoon has seen the impact of the development at the Cummings Center. And while it's been a benefit to the city in terms of revenue, I don't think anyone can deny that it's certainly clogged neighborhood streets. And depending upon the time of day, depending upon the weather, whether there's a traffic accident somewhere on 128, that traffic is already backing up. And if we don't look carefully at the development that we're considering for the Brimbal Ave area, whether it's the Phase 1 or Phase 2, the sprawl that we're already seeing there is only going to work its way farther up, and it's eventually going to begin impacting more and more neighborhoods. I think an important thing for us is the realization that Brimbal Ave is a main access road to the downtown. Folks have long abandoned Route 62 and 1A excuse me, as a way to get downtown because it's often in constant gridlock. Brimbal Ave is that final access point that allows folks to freely get from North Beverly to Beverly, and we're concerned that if the development goes through the way that it's planned, that it will negatively impact the downtown for that reason. And we were gratified by this, as I said before, the support that Paul Guanci has said in his comments to the City Council to that effect, because I think he recognizes we've worked so hard to revitalize our downtown, and to do something like this that will surely have a negative impact on it, I think would be a mistake.
Yeah, they also brought up that point, Paul Guanci and Don Martin, in their letter to the editor in today's paper.
Certainly, yeah, in today's paper, actually.
And one more point I would like to mention of what a no vote does. It also sends the message that residents need to have a seat at the table to make these important decisions that impact our lives. And that hasn't happened through this process. And I think that's a really important point. And voting no sends that message that that does need to happen. And it does create the space for that to happen as we move forward in this project.
Now, the voting will be held at one location, the Beverly High School, and you wanted to be sure that you were able to address this issue of one polling place, and you wanted to make some comments on that. Dan, you want to start with that?
Sure, absolutely, if I could. So when this proposal went to the City Council accepted the signatures, and they certified almost 3,600 signatures, which required that the issue be put on the ballot. We were grateful for that because I think folks felt they wanted to have a voice, they wanted to have a chance to make that decision. And when folks signed that petition, even folks that didn't necessarily agree with us agreed that it was right that everyone should have the chance to vote on it because it was that important. And so when we presented those signatures and when the city solicitor determined that we had sufficient numbers, the City Council voted immediately to allow for the polling to take place at a single location. And I can appreciate their concerns that they want to get the vote over with because they want the opportunity to get the money, to get the funding, to get the road built in a timely manner. It does not help folks getting to the polls if they're limited to a single location. We feel that the vote is so important that nothing should be done to hinder their ability to get to the polls. So, for example, limiting to a single polling place, even in the best of circumstances, we think would not be the right thing to do. To do that in the middle of the winter, on February 8th, a day that historically has seen record snowfalls, makes no sense in my mind. And anything that limits folks' ability to get to the polls is a mistake. There may be some cost savings, but they wouldn't seem to be justified if folks were not able to get to the polls to have their voice heard on it. That, coupled with the fact that the city solicitor has indicated that their reading of the city charter requires a 20% minimum participation voting no, makes that even more difficult. So it would put the city in an unusual, I think, set of circumstances if we wake up on the 9th of February to learn that the no vote has won, but it was unable to meet that 20% threshold, which we still don't think is correct, frankly. To have a majority of voters who were able to brave the weather and go out to the polls, only to be unsuccessful because they didn't meet that minimum threshold, and to know that that minimum threshold may not have been met because the city chose to have only a single polling location instead of the traditional ward polling locations. I think that would be a mistake.
Jen, you want to add anything to that?
I would just add that there have been several members who participated in the Charter Commission who have approached us and told us that they don't think the city's interpretation of that 20% rule is the right one, that they read it as requiring 20% of registered voters to vote either way, and then a majority would win. So we've, tried to pursue an independent decision that has not been followed through on. But the important thing is that there is kind of, it's not a clear-cut interpretation, and I think there's going to be kind of potential issues that could arise in the scenario that Dan described.
And if I could, just one final point, just to put that 20% figure into perspective, only 2 candidates in the last election met that 20% threshold, our new mayor and Paul Guanci. Everyone else did not meet that 20% threshold, and yet they have been elected to office. So we feel that it's too high a barrier, and most importantly, that the city should not have gone out of its way to make that more difficult to attain that.
Well, very good, folks. I want to thank our guests today, Dr. Jan Morris and Dan DeAngelis. And you have been watching a special program on BevCam that is being produced by the North Beverly Neighborhood Association. And for BevCam, this is Walt Kosmowski, and I would urge you to go out and vote February 8th. Whether you vote yes or no, please exercise your franchise and vote. Thank you very much.